Hello there, students. Thank you for being part of this presentation. My name is Luis Silva. I am your American government teacher. And today we're going to focus on writing the United States Constitution. Very important topic in American government. But first, let's go over some basic information about the Constitution. First is basically the highest law of the country. All of our laws come from the Constitution. It says how the government is supposed to work, and it's divided in 7 articles. Article 1 creates the Congress. Article 2 creates the presidency. Article 3 creates the Supreme Court. Article 4 defines states' powers. They must recognize each other's laws. Article 5 describes the amendment process. Article 6 basically talks about federal laws are above all other laws. And Article 7, the ratification process, how to approve it. Now, each state also has a constitution. They are the highest laws for that state, but the United States Constitution is the highest law of the country. Some people, and I truly believe that the Constitution is a living document. And it's a living document because it can be changed. It is changed by an amendment. The first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights. By defining these rights in the Constitution, they are federally guaranteed for everybody that lives in the United States. There are currently 27 amendments. Not all of them involve rights, but many do. Article 5 of the Constitution describes the amendment process. 2/3 or 66% of each House of Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate must approve, then ratified by 3/4 or 75% of the state legislatures. This is how an amendment is actually passed and it becomes law, by this particular process here. Now, a short history of the Constitution. The Constitution was written in 1787 by a group of men that we know as the framers of the Constitution. Some of them are called or the fathers of the Constitution. They fiercely debated what should be in the Constitution, and they had to create something that was almost perfect in order for this country to actually work. The Articles of Confederation, which we have seen before, did not work very well. For example, Shays' Rebellion showed that the framers needed to find a new way to run the country. Delegates of the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia. They included persons such as James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, and I'm going to throw in there also Thomas Jefferson. All of those people came together, along with many more, to put together this document that would create a strong government. Now, anti-federalists insisted on a Bill of Rights, which became the first 10 amendments to the original Constitution. By the way, we call them anti-federalists because they were very concerned about the welfare of the new nation. They did not want basically the federal government to overrun everybody and dictate what they were going to do. So the anti-federalists were mainly concerned about providing more rights for people, and these rights are actually in the first 10 amendments. For example, the first amendment, obviously freedom of speech, freedom of the press. So they were very concerned about the welfare of the nation. In 1787, there were only 13 states. All states, except Rhode Island, sent delegates to the convention. Each state had its own idea for a new government. So you have 13 states, you have representatives from each state, and they were all trying to put together those ideas that would create a document that would ensure that the country would run smoothly, that the rights of people were respected by the government. There was the New Jersey Plan, the Virginia Plan, the Great Compromise, the Three-Fifth Compromise. many opinions and issues had to be accommodated to the United States. The key to becoming the United States was a compromise. So among these plans, the founding fathers had to debate and had to come to an agreement as to what and how the government should look like. Now, the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. The preamble to the U.S. Constitution has no force in law. Instead, it establishes the why of the Constitution, explaining why this document exists. You need to provide a reason. You need to provide a why. Why are you creating this document? And that is the preamble of the U.S. Constitution. It reflects the desires of the framers to improve the government they currently had, to be more perfect than the Articles of Confederation. Remember, the Articles of Confederation, they failed. They had no power. To ensure that our government would be just and would protect its citizens from internal strife and from attacks from the outside. It would be of benefit to the people rather than to their detriment. And perhaps more importantly, it intended to do the same for future generations of America. And here is a closer look, basically, the goals of the preamble. For example, you have to form a more perfect union. This actually, in an explanation, if you see the next column here, basically create a nation in which states work together. And then you have established justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the defense, for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So these are some of the goals of the preamble that were set initially in the U.S. Constitution. Now, moving on to what we call amendments. As you know, an amendment is a change, basically. So when the Constitution was written, the framers knew that their creation was not perfect. They knew that other people would have good ideas for the Constitution and wanted to make sure that it wasn't too hard to make changes. For that matter, to say, well, wasn't too hard or too easy, but people could compromise and actually put together an amendment. The framers created an amendment process. An amendment to the Constitution is basically a change that can add to the Constitution or change an older part of it. If you see here, you have the process, and we talked a little bit before about this process. So it's a good idea, or it was a good idea for the framers, for the founding fathers of this country, to put this tool that would allow future generations to make changes to certain parts of the Constitution. The original Constitution had no Bill of Rights, and this is where the anti-federalists actually came through, because they actually pushed for a Bill of Rights. Many of the framers didn't think it was needed. These were actually known as the Federalists. Others disagreed, known as the Anti-Federalists. So promises were made to add one using the amendment process. Soon, the new government started meeting. Congress proposed the Bill of Rights. A list of 12 changes was sent to the states. And in 1791, 10 of those 12 changes were approved. And they became known as the Bill of Rights. By the way, we are going to talk more in details in future presentations about the Bill of Rights. And basically, the Bill of Rights identifies 10 specific freedoms. The first 10 amendments deal with freedom of religion, the right to worship, freedom of speech, right to basically speak, freedom of the press, right to publish ideas, freedom of assembly, right to meet peacefully in groups, freedom to petition, right to protest the government. These are some of the components that became part of the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is there in the Constitution because our founding fathers, in this case, also known as the Anti-Federalists, they actually fought and they argue with the other founding fathers that this was actually needed to protect the rights of individual people. Now, how does the Constitution work? Well, we have the Judicial Branch, the Supreme Court. We have the Executive Branch, the President, and we have the Legislative Branch, the Congress. So let's start with the Judicial Branch, checks on the President. Basically, the Judicial Branch, the Supreme Court, can say or can declare executive acts unconstitutional. Judges appointed for life are free from executive control. Now, checks on the Congress by the Judicial Branch. Judicial review can declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. Now, let's move on to the Executive Branch and checks on the courts. Basically, the Executive Branch appoints federal judges, can grant reprieves and pardons for federal crimes. Now, the Executive Branch checks on Congress, can veto acts of Congress. If the president doesn't like a law that Congress has passed, he can actually veto it. Can call special sessions of Congress, can suggest laws and send messages to Congress. Now, the Legislative Branch checks on the president by actually can impeach or remove the president, can override a veto of the president, controls the spending of money. In other words, the Legislative Branch has like the purse. They control the cash in the country. They also, or in this case, the Judicial Branch can basically be there to make sure that the president does not get in a way too powerful. And they can control this by, in this case, restricting the president, for example, on many things that, especially things that have to do with spending money by the president. Also, the Senate can refuse to confirm presidential appointments and to ratify treaties. Now, checks on the court by the Legislative Branch can impeach and remove federal judges, can establish lower federal courts, can refuse to confirm judicial appointments. Now, moving on. The Legislative Branch, called the Congress, makes laws. It is a bicameral or composed of two parts. The upper house is the Senate and the lower house is the House of Representatives. In the Senate, all seats are equally represented, 2 senators per state. In the House of Representatives, states are represented proportionally based on their population. So whichever state has the most people, that state actually has more representatives. For example, California is one of the states that has close to 40 million people right now. So we have more than 50 basically House of Representative members, and we have 2 senators. Now the Senate, there are 2 senators from each state. Since we have 50 states, there are 100 senators. The people elect senators in public elections. And senators must be 30 years old, or at least 30 years old, be a U.S. citizen for at least 9 years, be a citizen of the state they represent, and they serve a 2-year term. In this case, you have the senators from Arizona, Jeff Flake, which is no longer there right now, and you have John McCain, which has passed away, as you may be aware already. Now, the House of Representatives. Representatives are from districts within a state and represent the people in that district. The people have the right to tell them how they feel about issues. Currently, there are 435 representatives. The number is based on population, both states and territories. For example, Puerto Rico, Guam, and American Samoa are represented. Arizona currently has 9 representatives in the House of Representatives. The United States Capitol building. You can see here is what we talked before. You have representatives, the different positions. You have representatives, you have senators, you have the president, and then you have the Supreme Court. The House of Representatives serve for 2 years. The senators serve for 6 years. The president for 4 years. And the Supreme Court, obviously, the term is unlimited. The representatives' minimum age must be 25 years old. The senators must be 30. The president must be 35. And the Supreme Court, there are no age restrictions. And if you can see, residency and citizenship are all part of this particular component or requirement for or to serve in the United States government. The legislative branch now. When the Congress wants to pass a law, both the House and the Senate must agree to the exact same law. If they cannot agree, the law cannot pass. A proposed law is called a bill and is given a number. Either house can propose a bill, but both must agree on it. For example, Senate Bill 98-703 and House Bill 98-758 might be two versions of the same bill. But at the end of the day, both cameras, both houses must come to like an agreement, and they must decide on which version they want to adapt to or want to approve. The executive branch, the role of the president in this case is mainly to make sure that the law is carried out and includes all forms of law enforcement. The president heads the executive, which includes a cabinet or his cabinet. Under the president, all cabinet members and department heads, called the secretaries, who report directly to the president. The cabinet includes vice president and 15 departments, plus the attorney general. The secretaries of all the departments report to the executive, such as Homeland Security, Education, EPA, Defense, Agriculture, Energy, Justice, Labor, Transportation, and others. The director of the FBI and the CIA report to the president also, but they are not part of the president's cabinet. And here you have an older image of the Obama administration and who used to be working with him. You have also the Vice President Joe Biden next to Mr. Obama. Now the White House. The White House is the official residence and office of the president. Cabinet members and the vice president work there also. The judicial branch. The third branch is the judicial branch. Its role is to interpret the laws. The federal court system is headed by the Supreme Court because it is the highest court in the land. Supreme Court judges are nominated by the president and approved by the Senate. They serve for life but can choose to retire at any age. States have their own court system, including their own Supreme Courts, which have final say on state laws, except for the federal courts and, of course, the Supreme Court. This is a building of the United States Supreme Court. As you can see, it's a glorious building. It is designed like with the style and architecture, of the Romans and the Greeks. It's a very, very impressive building. The Supreme Court justices, this is in 2015. The court terms begin the first Monday of October and ends the first Monday of October of the following year. They observe holidays and take vacations during the recess. As you can see, most of them are pretty old. They have been appointed by the U.S. President and they have been confirmed by the United States Senate. And these people are the ones that can basically change the makeup of laws, can override any law that was passed in a state. I mean, they're very powerful. They have a final say, and basically what they say, it's the final word. Now, judicial review. Judicial review, it's a big concept, and it is the ability of a court to examine and decide if a statute, treaty, or administrative regulation contradicts or violates the provisions of existing laws, a state constitution, or ultimately the United States Constitution. While the Constitution does not explicitly define a power of judicial review, the authority for judicial review has been inferred from the structure, provisions, and history of the Constitution. Judges examine a law or government activity and decide if it violates the Constitution. If it violates it, then there's a problem with that law. It was established in 1803 in the case of Marbury versus Madison, was the first Supreme Court case where the court asserted its authority for judicial review to strike down a law that is considered to be unconstitutional. Judicial review allows the Supreme Court and other federal courts to play a key role in lawmaking. The judges examine a law or government activity. They then decide whether it violates the Constitution. The Supreme Court established this is an important right, especially as we talked about it in Marbury versus Madison. This is when the Supreme Court actually took upon this particular power, and it has done fairly well for hundreds of years. Now we have basically come to this conclusion, and I really hope that you gained a whole bunch of content, as this will help you for your U.S. government class. Now, we are going to be reviewing some of the questions that you are asked for this particular tutorial. And in this tutorial, you are asked to actually write about a couple of things that are very important when it comes to the U.S. government. You are actually supposed to write an essay. Please make sure that your essays are at least 3 paragraphs. A formal essay actually consists of an introduction, thesis statement. There in the introduction, it includes also a 3-body paragraph, and it includes also a conclusion. In this case, you're given a prompt in which you're supposed to write about the Constitution itself. And let me read what it's asking you to do. Thomas Jefferson once described how too much government creates a dictatorship. Too little government creates anarchy, and either outcome harms the citizen. Consider the federal government that the founders created in 1787. It took serious debates for the founders to sculpt a new government that balanced individual liberty with government authority. For this activity, you will write a 250-word essay that argues your opinion about the Constitutional Convention. You can imagine you are one of the delegates to the convention and argue from that perspective. You can even choose a specific player in the debate and compromise. In your essay, answer the following questions. Do you think that the final version of the U.S. Constitution created a political system that gives too much, too little, or just enough power to the central government? Do you think the Great Compromise created a functional and fair representative Congress? Please make sure you provide at least 3 paragraphs answering these questions. And we talked about the Constitutional Convention. We talked about the balance of powers, the separation of powers in 3 branches. The executive, the legislative, and the judicial, and you need to focus on this content in order to put together your essay here. Now, the other part, it's basically ratifying the U.S. Constitution. In this case, you're also writing another essay. The prompts that you will be addressing first is, how did George Washington play a role in forming the new federal government in 1787? How did George Washington define the executive branch for future presidents, such as through his decision to retire after serving 2 terms? And you're supposed to put together an essay, again, at least 3 paragraphs, that talk about this. You have some additional resources that you can actually click on here or on your tutorial and go from there in answering a lot of these questions here, or part of these questions here. And this is the end of our presentation. I hope that you did learn a lot, and if you have questions, please reach out to your teacher, and please do your best.